They told me the night shift was the easiest. Nothing but black sky, white snow, and the endless hum of the generators. But on my third night at Outpost Jericho, I learned that nothing about this place was easy, and some things should never be seen after midnight. The base sat like a steel scar in the middle of nowhere, buried beneath mountains of ice and silence. We were over 200 miles from the nearest settlement, closer to the Arctic Circle than to civilization. My job was simple: patrol the perimeter, monitor the cameras, keep the fence intact, and make sure the cold didn't eat me alive. That night, the air felt different, sharper, like it carried teeth. I stood inside the guard shack, staring at the row of monitors that showed the floodlit perimeter. The snow outside glittered like broken glass beneath the tower's spotlights. Nothing moved, not the wind, not the trees. Hell, there weren't even trees this far north, just snow, ice, and the shadows that stretched forever. Then, something flickered across monitor 3. At first I thought it was static, a glitch. The camera's old wiring sometimes cut out in the cold, but when I leaned forward, I saw it again. Movement, just beyond the chain link fence. It was too fast to be human, too tall, too crooked. I adjusted the controls, zoomed in. The picture swam with interference, but for a second, just a second, I saw something standing at the edge of the lights. Its shape didn't make sense. The body was wrong, bent in places where no body should bend. And then it was gone. I grabbed the radio. "Control, this is Tower 2, do you copy?" Static. The radio hissed like a living thing, whispering through the channels. I switched frequencies, tried again. Nothing. When I looked back at the monitor, the screen was clear. Empty snow, empty fence. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe doubt. I thought the old stories the men told in the mess hall weren't just stories. They said this base was built over something older, that before the military poured concrete and steel into the permafrost, scientists had been here, digging, drilling, uncovering things buried beneath the ice. Some soldiers laughed about it. Others crossed themselves and muttered prayers when the lights flickered. I didn't laugh, not anymore, because when I opened the guard shack door and stepped outside, I heard it. Not the wind, not the hum of the generators. Breathing. Deep, ragged breathing, just beyond the fence line. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the snow. Nothing. Just the swirling frost. Then the beam landed on footprints, huge ones, sunken deep into the snow, spaced farther apart than any human stride. They led straight to the fence, then stopped. No return tracks, no sign of anything moving away. I froze, my breath fogging in the freezing air. The silence pressed against me, heavy and unnatural. Somewhere out there, in the blind black beyond the lights, something was waiting. And it wasn't alone, because from the far side of the compound, faint but unmistakable, came another sound, another set of footsteps crunching in the snow. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, heart hammering. For the first time since arriving at Outpost Jericho, I realized I wasn't guarding this base. It was guarding me. The next morning, the world looked deceptively normal. Snow stretched white and endless across the horizon, glittering in the early sun like diamonds scattered on glass. The base hummed awake, men trudging through the frost in heavy coats, boots crunching the ice-crusted ground. If not for what I'd seen on the monitors and those impossible footprints, I might have convinced myself it was nothing but exhaustion, a trick of the dark. But I couldn't unsee it. Couldn't forget the sound of breathing in the frozen night. Outpost Jericho wasn't a large installation, not compared to the major stations in Alaska or Norway. It was more like a cluster of concrete and steel jammed into the permafrost. 2 barracks, a command post, the mess hall, a hangar for supply drops, and the fence that circled us like a cage. There were 24 soldiers stationed here, along with a skeleton crew of technicians and 1 grizzled doctor who rarely left his quarters. Enough people to keep things running, but not enough to make the place feel alive. We were cut off by design. No roads, no easy exits. The only contact with the outside world came once a month, when a transport plane braved the weather to deliver supplies. If anything went wrong, if the generators failed or the radios died, we were alone. The men filled the mess hall that morning, shoving trays of powdered eggs and burnt toast across metal tables. Voices echoed, loud to cover the silence of the place. I slid into a seat across from Ramirez, another night guard. He was older, skin weathered like leather, eyes always half-lidded like he'd seen too much and cared too little. "You look like hell," he muttered around a mouthful of eggs. "Didn't sleep much," I admitted. His gaze lingered on me, curious. "First weeks always screw with your head. You start seeing things, shadows, movement where there ain't none. Just the ice plays, and tricks." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But I couldn't shake the image of that crooked figure on the monitor. Couldn't forget those footprints. Instead, I asked, "You ever hear anything? Outside the fence?" Ramirez's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For a moment, the noise of the mess hall seemed to fade. Then he set the fork down, leaned closer. "After midnight?" he asked quietly. I nodded. His jaw tightened. He didn't smile, didn't laugh it off like a joke. He just said, "Stay inside the lights. Don't go looking." Then he pushed away from the table and left me sitting there with my untouched food. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine. Equipment checks, perimeter walks, endless cold. But Ramirez's words sat in my chest like a stone. By dusk, the floodlights flared back to life, bathing the base in sterile white. Shadows stretched long across the snow. My shift started again at midnight. As I headed for the guard shack, I passed the fence. The snow was fresh, wind smoothing its surface clean. No footprints, no evidence. And yet I couldn't shake the sense that something was out there, just beyond the reach of the light, watching, waiting. When the tower clock struck 12 and I settled in front of the monitors again, I already knew the night wouldn't be quiet. Because the radio crackled, soft, broken, and a voice I didn't recognize whispered my name. The voice was faint, like a thread of sound unraveling in static. Miller. My blood ran cold. No one here called me by my last name over the radio unless it was official. And this wasn't official. It was soft. Wrong. Like someone trying on my name the way a predator might taste blood in its mouth. I grabbed the receiver. "Control. Say again." Static hissed back at me. A low, pulsing crackle filled the shack until it seemed to vibrate in my teeth. Then silence. I checked the frequency. It was the one we all used for patrols. But nobody else was on shift, not at midnight. For a long moment I stared at the radio, half expecting the voice to return. It didn't. Instead, one of the monitors flickered. Camera 6, the northern fence line. The picture blinked once, twice, then stabilized. A supply crate sat at the edge of the compound right against the fence. That made no sense. Deliveries only came by air, dropped near the hangar. No one brought supplies to the outer fence. I leaned closer, squinting at the grainy feed. The crate was stenciled with our insignia, stamped like any other shipment, but the snow around it was untouched. No boot prints, no tracks, nothing to suggest how it got there. Against my better judgment, I decided to check it out. The air outside was razor sharp, each breath burning like frost in my lungs. Floodlights stretched shadows across the snow as I trudged toward the northern fence. My boots crunched with a sound far too loud in the silence. When I reached the spot, my stomach dropped. The crate wasn't there. Nothing but clean, untouched snow. The fence rising tall and rimed with ice. No drag marks, no indentations, no sign anything had been there at all. But the camera had shown it. I wasn't imagining that. I swept my flashlight across the ground, searching for even the faintest clue. The beam caught something, half buried in the snow just beyond the fence. Paper. I knelt, reaching through the links to snag it. My gloved fingers brushed the frozen surface, tugging it free. It was a shipping manifest, official military paperwork, but the date stamped across the top made my breath hitch. 74. Over 50 years old. The ink was faded, the corners frayed, and beneath the list of supplies was a signature. The name scratched across the bottom meant nothing to me. until I realized the file room kept records of every officer ever stationed here, and I was certain that name had been whispered in the mess hall stories. One of the scientists who disappeared when the base was first constructed. I stuffed the paper into my pocket, heart hammering. On the way back, I glanced over my shoulder. The floodlights barely reached the outer black, but for a moment, just a blink, I saw movement beyond them. A tall, crooked shadow sliding away into the endless white. Back inside the guard shack, I replayed the feed from camera 6. The crate was gone from the recording, like it had never been there at all. My hand shook as I shut the monitors off. That was the first anomaly, the first thing I couldn't explain away with exhaustion or tricks of the light. And deep down, I knew it wouldn't be the last. Morning came bitter and gray, the kind of cold that made every breath scrape like glass in my chest. I hadn't slept. The memory of that shipping manifest burned in my pocket, heavier than lead. I'd planned to show it to the commanding officer, Captain Harlan, but when I pulled it out again, the paper was gone, vanished. Only a faint residue of frost clung to the inside of my coat. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The neat rows of typed words, the signature, the impossible date. But how do you explain evidence that disappears the second you need it? At breakfast, I searched the faces of the men. Some joked, some yawned, some stared hollow-eyed at their trays. Nobody looked like they'd spent the night whispering through a radio. Nobody looked like they'd hauled a ghost crate to the fence. I said nothing. By evening, the temperature plummeted further. My shift began with Ramirez. We walked the perimeter together, flashlights cutting weak beams across the snow. The floodlights buzzed overhead, their halos of light barely touching the fence line. Beyond them stretched a blackness that felt thicker than night, as if the world itself ended a few feet from the wire. Halfway through the walk, Ramirez stopped. "You see that?" I followed his beam. The snow outside the fence wasn't smooth anymore. A trail of indentation snaked along the perimeter, wide and heavy. At first glance, they looked like footprints, but they were too deep, pressed into the ice as if by something massive. Each step was spaced farther apart than a human stride, and the pattern circled the compound, endless, deliberate. "They weren't here yesterday," I whispered. Ramirez knelt, brushing frost from one of the prints. Too heavy for a wolf, too wide for a bear. And he tapped his glove against the frozen outline. No claw marks. We followed the trail until it disappeared into the darkness beyond the range of the lights. There were no return prints. Whatever it was had walked one way and had not come back. When we reached the north sector, the radio clipped to my vest crackled. "Inside already," a voice whispered. Ramirez stiffened. "Say again?" "You're not safe." I slammed the receiver off. My pulse thundered so loud I thought he could hear it. We didn't speak after that, just finished the circuit and retreated to the shack, the silence between us heavier than any snow. Back inside, I poured myself coffee with shaking hands. Ramirez stared at the monitors like a man waiting for judgment. Finally, he said, "They always come when the sun's gone. Always." I turned to him. "You've seen them?" His eyes didn't leave the screen. "Not them, just signs, prints, shadows, breathing, enough to know we're not alone." I wanted to ask more, but the monitors flickered. One by one, each camera blinked black before sputtering back to life, and when they did, new tracks marked the snow. Fresh ones, circling closer. By dawn, the prints were gone, erased as though the ice itself had healed overnight. But I knew better. Something had walked the perimeter in the dead of night, studying us, testing the fence. And the way those tracks closed in, step by step. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was hunting. Sleep became a stranger after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the prints circling the base, drawing closer with each lap, as though something out there had infinite patience. By the time my shift ended, I collapsed on my bunk, boots still on, rifle leaned against the wall. That was when I first heard it. Not a voice exactly, not the way you hear someone speak. It was more like a vibration under my skin, a hushed murmur in the marrow of my bones. At first, I thought someone in the barracks was whispering in their sleep. The sound trickled through the room, too faint to catch words, too insistent to ignore. I sat up. Who the hell's talking? Nobody answered. The bunks around me were filled with sleeping bodies, slow breaths steaming in the cold. Yet the whispering continued, threading through the silence. I stood and followed it to the far wall. Nothing there but lockers and peeling paint. Still, the sound swelled until it felt like it was bleeding out of the concrete itself. I pressed my ear to the wall. A dozen voices hissed at once, overlapping, urgent. Words half-formed, slipping away before I could make sense of them. The only one I caught chilled me to the core. Inside. I staggered back, heart pounding. The whispers faded, dissolving into the low creak of the building. The next day, I kept it to myself. I wasn't about to tell the others I was hearing voices in the walls, but it didn't matter, because by nightfall, I realized I wasn't the only one. In the mess hall, Thompson, a young private with shaky hands, muttered to no one in particular. "They won't shut up. They just keep talking." His tray clattered to the floor, food scattering across the concrete. Ramirez and I exchanged a look. Thompson's eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. "Who won't shut up?" Ramirez asked. Thompson blinked like he'd just woken from a dream. "Didn't you hear? Or them? They were whispering all night." Nobody laughed. Nobody told him he was crazy. The silence that followed was worse than laughter could have been. It meant others had heard it too. That night, the whispers came stronger. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the voices threading in from every corner of the barracks. They rose and fell like waves, sometimes urgent, sometimes soft and coaxing. Some were male, others female. Some sounded like children. What unnerved me most wasn't the sound itself. It was that I began to recognize the voices, familiar cadences, familiar tones. I heard my mother's voice, dead for years, calling my name. I heard an old friend from training, killed in action overseas, urging me to open the door. I heard Ramirez's voice, whispering things he wasn't saying out loud. I jammed my fists against my ears, but the sound was inside, not outside, buried under my skin. At 03:15, every man in the barracks sat bolt upright at the same time. 30 soldiers, breathing hard, eyes wide, listening to the same thing I was. The whispers stopped. In their place came 3 sharp knocks on the barracks door. Slow, deliberate. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then a voice spoke, loud this time, clear as daylight. "Let me in." Morning came with a silence that felt heavier than usual, as though the whole base was holding its breath. Nobody talked about the knocks on the door, though I saw the fear etched into every man's face. Soldiers who normally joked over their breakfast trays now sat stiff and quiet, eyes fixed on the floor. By mid-afternoon, the storm hit. The wind howled across the compound, battering the fence until the chain links shivered. Snow blew sideways, thick enough to swallow the floodlights. Orders came down from Captain Harlan, double patrols, eyes sharp. Ramirez and I drew the northern sector again. We trudged through the whiteout, visibility no more than 10 feet. My flashlight beam looked like a pale ribbon twisting in the wind. Halfway down the line, Ramirez stopped dead. There. At first I thought it was just another drift, a mound of snow shaped by the storm. But then the wind shifted, and I saw the unmistakable outline of a body half buried in the ice. We scrambled closer, brushing frost away with our gloved hands. What emerged made my stomach knot. It was a soldier. The uniform was standard issue, though weathered and stiff with frost. The man's skin was gray-blue, his eyes frozen open in a glassy stare. Ice crystals rimmed his lashes, his lips split and bloodless. He looked freshly dead, but when I checked his name patch, it wasn't anyone stationed here. The tag read, Lieutenant Charles R. Whitlow. The name hit me like a punch. Whitlow. It was the same one I'd seen on that shipping manifest, the one that had disappeared from my pocket. Jesus, Ramirez muttered. That's impossible. I swallowed hard. He's been dead for decades. And yet there he was, frozen solid, wearing a uniform that matched ours, as if he'd just stepped out of time and into the storm. We radioed for help. 4 more men came with stretchers, hauling the corpse back to the base. Dr. Keat, the old physician, met us at the infirmary. His hands trembled as he examined the body, peeling back the frozen layers of fabric. "This man's been dead a long time," Keating murmured. "Too long, but there's Something strange. His tissues aren't decomposed, just frozen, as if he lay down last night. Then how the hell did he end up outside the fence? Ramirez asked. Keating didn't answer. He just covered the corpse and ordered it stored in the infirmary freezer. Word spread fast. By evening, the entire base was buzzing, fear threading through every whispered conversation. Some swore they recognized the name Whitlow from the original survey team, scientists and officers who vanished before the base was fully operational. Others claimed his ghost had been walking the perimeter for years. That night, I sat alone in the shack, staring at the monitors. The storm hadn't let up, snow slashing against the floodlights. And in the corner of camera 2, just beyond the frozen fence, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. Lieutenant Whitlow. Standing upright in the snow, frost still clinging to his uniform, eyes glowing faintly against the dark. I blinked, heart racing. The screen flickered, and he was gone. But I knew what I'd seen. The corpse in the freezer wasn't the only Whitlow out there. By the next night, tension had strangled the base. Men walked with their shoulders hunched, rifles slung, but hands never far from the trigger. Nobody wanted to admit it, but we all felt the same thing, that the walls were closing in, and something outside was pressing harder with every hour. The storm eased to a whisper, leaving behind a sky sharp with stars. I almost felt relief, until the floodlights began to flicker. One by one, the bright halos stuttered and dimmed, throwing jagged shadows across the compound. Then, without warning, the entire base went dark. The hum of the generators died, leaving only silence. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the wind. It was like the world itself had stopped breathing. Shouts erupted across the compound. Boots hammered against frozen ground as soldiers scrambled. I yanked out my flashlight, its thin beam slicing a tunnel through the black. Ramirez's light clicked on beside mine. "Power failure?" he muttered, voice tight. Before I could answer, the radios crackled. Not words, not even static. Something else. A wet, guttural noise, like breathing through water. It slithered through the channel, low and broken, rising and falling like an animal trying to form language. Miller. The sound of my name made me flinch. Ramirez cursed and twisted the knobs, cycling through frequencies. Every channel carried the same thing, those wet, inhuman noises. Men shouted in the dark, flashlights darting like fireflies. Some swore they heard footsteps in the snow. Others said whispers slid right past their ears, too close, like unseen mouths brushing their skin. "Stay calm!" Captain Harlan's voice boomed out of the darkness. "Form up by sectors! Nobody panics!" But panic had already set in. I swept my flashlight toward the fence. For a split second, I thought I saw dozens of shapes pressed against the wire, tall, crooked silo, wet swaying in the night. But when the beam steadied, the space was empty, just black snow and shadow. A scream tore through the dark. It came from the southern sector. Flashlights converged, beams slicing wildly. When I got there, Private Ellis was on his knees, clutching his head. His flashlight lay in the snow, beam tilted toward the fence. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, and his mouth moved in frantic whispers. "What's wrong with him?" Ramirez demanded. Keating shoved through, kneeling beside the soldier. "He's in shock. Get him to the infirmary." But Ellis's voice rose, frantic, shrill. "It's inside. It's already inside." He thrashed, hands clawing at the air as though fighting something none of us could see. It took 3 men to drag him back. His screams carried long after he was gone. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the power surged back. The floodlights flared, blinding after so much dark. Generators roared to life. The radios fell silent, but the relief didn't last. Because in the snow beneath the relit towers, fresh tracks led straight from the fence to the barracks. Heavy, deep prints. And this time, there were 2 sets. The base was different after the blackout. Even with the floodlights blazing again, the shadows felt thicker, heavier. Nobody trusted the light anymore. We all knew the dark had teeth. Ellis remained locked in the infirmary, strapped to a cot after he'd tried clawing his own face off. His screams echoed down the hallways, thin and ragged, begging us to cut it out before it takes root. Nobody asked him what it was. Nobody wanted to hear the answer. Captain Harlan doubled the patrols, though it was obvious the men's nerves were shot. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were jumpy kids with guns, waiting for something unseen to come tearing through the wire. That night, just after 1 a.m., it did. Ramirez and I were stationed near the east fence when the first sound hit, a metallic groan deep enough to vibrate through the frozen ground. Then, snap. One of the chain link panels bowed outward, the steel shrieking as something heavy pushed against it. "Contact!" Ramirez shouted into the radio. Our beams hit the fence just in time to catch movement. The links rattled violently, bulging inward like the metal itself was breathing. Then came a blur of motion, too fast, too big. The fence split with a scream of tearing steel. Something came through. We fired without orders, bullets cracking across the night. My rifle kicked against my shoulder, muzzle flash, strobing glimpses of the thing moving through the snow. It wasn't human. Too tall, too wrong. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, joints reversing mid-step. Its body was wrapped in shadows, but when my light caught its face, if you could call it a face, my stomach lurched. It had no eyes, just a smooth, pale expanse where they should have been. And yet I knew with bone-deep certainty that it was staring straight at me. The thing shrieked, a sound like metal grinding underwater. It lunged forward, scattering men like leaves. One soldier, Pierce, didn't even scream, just vanished beneath the weight of it. Blood sprang across the snow in an arc. We fired until the air stank of cordite, but the bullets seemed to sink into it without slowing it down. The thing moved like smoke given muscle, flickering from one spot to another, closer every time. "Fall back!" Harlan's voice bellowed over the comms. We retreated toward the barracks, flashlights whipping wildly. Another scream split the night, this one human, sharp and cut short. I glanced back and wished I hadn't. The creature stood over Ramirez, its jaw unhinged too wide, dragging him into the snow. I raised my rifle to fire, but the thing melted into the dark, taking him with it. Only his flashlight remained, beam trembling against the blood-stained ground. By the time reinforcements arrived, the fence lay in twisted ruin. 3 men were gone, Ramirez among them. The thing had vanished. We regrouped inside the mess hall, doors barred, rifles loaded. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at me. They all knew I'd seen Ramirez go under. They all knew I hadn't saved him. Finally, Captain Harlan broke the silence. "This base is under attack. From now on, no one goes outside alone. No one. Do you understand me?" We nodded, hollow-eyed, but in my gut, I knew it didn't matter. Because the prints in the snow weren't outside anymore. They led straight to the barracks door. By morning, the wind screamed across the tundra with a fury that made the walls tremble. Snow lashed the compound, erasing the world beyond the fence in a white blur. Even the floodlights, blazing at full strength, couldn't pierce the storm more than a few feet. It was like we were buried alive, sealed inside a coffin of ice. Nobody spoke of Ramirez. Nobody dared. His bunk lay stripped bare, his locker already emptied by men who wanted no reminder of him. But I couldn't shake the image of his body being dragged into the dark, that pale, eyeless face bending close as he vanished. The storm raged for hours, trapping us indoors. Patrols were suspended, but Harlan ordered watches maintained at every window. I drew the east wing, a narrow corridor with frost clawing through the glass. The storm howled so loud it drowned out my own breathing. Then I saw it. At first, just movement. A ripple in the blizzard, darker than the snow, shifting against the wind instead of with it. My chest went tight. I pressed closer to the glass, squinting into the whiteout. It was out there. The thing moved slow, deliberate, its tall, crooked body sliding through the storm. Sometimes it flickered, half swallowed by the snow, like the blizzard itself wanted to hide it. But every time the wind tore open a gap, I saw more. Those wrong bending limbs, that blank face lifted toward the window. It was looking at me. I backed away, fumbling for my radio. "East wing, movement outside. It's here." Static swallowed the response. The blizzard was jamming the signals. The glass rattled as the wind slammed against it, but I swore I felt something more, an extra weight pressing from the other side, as if invisible hands dragged across the pane. My breath fogged in the freezing air. Then the whispers started again, soft at first, curling under the shriek of the storm. They rose from the floor. The seal, the walls, threading into my skull until my knees buckled. This time I caught words clearly. "Open, open, open." I staggered back, rifle clutched tight, trying to block it out. The storm outside howled louder, almost mocking me. When I looked again, the thing was gone. Only endless snow whipped past the glass. I left my post and ran for the mess hall. Inside, the men were huddled around dim lanterns, weapons close. Their faces were pale, hollowed by fear. Thompson sat rocking in the corner, muttering over and over, "It moves with the storm. It is the storm." Nobody corrected him. Suddenly, the emergency lights flickered, casting everything in blood-red glow. A heavy thump shook the outer wall, then another, the sound of something circling the building. The wind wasn't the only thing out there. We aimed our rifles at the door, nerves frayed to breaking. Snow sifted in through cracks, carried on a cold that felt alive. The storm screamed, the walls groaned. And from just outside the mess hall door, muffled by the blizzard but unmistakable, came Ramirez's voice. "Let me in." No one moved when Ramirez's voice echoed from the other side of the mess hall door. Not a shuffle, not a breath. Every man's eyes fixed on the wood as if it might splinter under the weight of that familiar tone. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. The cadence, the drawl, the exact rhythm of his voice. If I hadn't seen him dragged into the dark, I would have sworn it was really him standing out there in the storm. "Ramirez is dead," Captain Harlan said finally, his voice low and even. "Nobody opens that door." But doubt flickered in the room like candlelight. Thompson shook his head furiously. "That was him. I heard him clear as day. He's alive out there and we're just leaving him." "It's not him," I snapped. "It's using him. Don't you get it? It wants us to open the door." The whispers returned then, curling through the cracks of the building, teasing the edges of our thoughts. Some men clutched their ears. Others sat rigid, fighting the pull. "Help me, please." That broke something in Private Ellis. The same Ellis who'd screamed about it being inside 2 nights before. He lunged for the door, fingers fumbling at the locks. Harlan fired a shot into the ceiling. The sound cracked like thunder, snapping everyone back. "Sit down." His voice was steel. "If anyone touches that door again, I'll put the next round through your skull." Ellis froze, chest heaving, before stumbling back into the group. But the seed had been planted. We no longer trusted each other. Every glance carried suspicion. Every silence felt like someone listening to whispers no one else could hear. By midnight, arguments broke out. Thompson accused Keating of covering things up, claiming the doctor knew more about Whitlow's body than he was admitting. Keating shot back that Thompson was already compromised, his mind eaten by the voices. The captain tried to restore order, but the fear had rotted too deep. Men began splitting into cliques, huddling with those they trusted, staring daggers at the rest. That was when I realized what the thing was doing. It didn't need to break down the door. It was already winning by turning us against ourselves. The storm outside battered the walls. The whispers inside battered our sanity. At some point, I dozed in my chair, rifle across my lap. When I woke, the lantern was dimming and 3 bunks were empty. No one had seen the men leave. No one had heard the door open. We searched the compound but found nothing but snow-filled corridors and howling wind. No prints, no blood, no trace at all. The base was shrinking. Every hour, fewer of us remained. That night, lying awake, I thought about Ramirez, about the way his voice had slid through the door like smoke. If the thing could wear his voice, how long before it wore his face? And how would we know, in the end, who was real, and who was already one of them? The storm never let up. By dawn, the base looked half-buried, drifts swallowing the lower windows. The compound creaked under the weight, metal groaning like the bones of some dying beast. We gathered in the mess hall again, huddled around weak lantern light. Captain Harlan's face looked carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. None of us had slept much. Keating stumbled in late, his coat half-buttoned, face pale. He looked like he'd aged 20 years overnight. "It's gone," he rasped. "What's gone?" Harlan demanded. "The body," Keating said, voice shaking. "Whitlow, the corpse we pulled from the snow. It's not in the freezer." The room fell into stunned silence. My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," I said. "The infirmary's locked." "I checked the locks," Keating said. "Still bolted from the inside. No signs of forced entry. But the slab's empty. The corpse is gone." Whispers rose, sharp and panicked. Thompson laughed, a high, broken sound. It walked out, just like Ramirez. They're all walking around out there. Harlan slammed his fist against the table. Quiet, but his own voice wavered. We armed up and swept the infirmary. Frost crusted the windows, the halls lit by dim backup lamps. The freezer door hung open, cold mist curling out. The slab inside gleamed bare. No Whitlow, but there was something else. Etched into the frost on the wall were words, traced by a finger or something like one. Words that froze me colder than the air. You let me in. No one admitted writing it. No one could have. The infirmary had been locked all night. Back in the mess hall, the arguments began again. Thompson claimed Keating had staged it, that he was working with them. Keating shouted until his voice cracked, insisting he hadn't left his quarters until morning. The captain cut him off. Enough. We'll double the guards at every post. Nobody goes anywhere alone. But the damage was done. We all felt it. That thing wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside, walking our halls, breathing our air, wearing faces we knew. That night, I volunteered for guard duty in the infirmary. Something in me needed to see that empty slab again, to prove it hadn't been some collective hallucination. Hours passed in silence, the storm howling beyond the walls. My lantern guttered low. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold iron. Then, movement. I raised my rifle, breath frosting in the beam of my light. A shadow stretched across the far wall, long-limbed, bent wrong. My finger tightened on the trigger, and then it stepped into view. Ramirez. His face pale, eyes hollow, uniform ragged and crusted with snow. But it was him. His voice was soft, cracked. Miller, help me. For a heartbeat, I almost believed it. Almost. Then I saw the way his mouth moved just out of sync with the words, the way his body flickered at the edges, like bad film. I fired. The lantern shattered in the chaos, plunging the infirmary into darkness. When others rushed in at the sound, Ramirez was gone. Only my smoking rifle and the whisper of my own breath remained. But on the wall, fresh frost spelled new words. Not him. By the third night of the storm, the base didn't feel like a military outpost anymore. It felt like a cage, and something else rattled the bars from the inside. We counted heads at dawn. 3 were missing. Corporal Hayes, Private Dorn, Sergeant Kinney, all gone. Their bunks were stripped, beds unslept in, gear untouched. The doors had been locked from the inside. No windows were broken. It was as if the men had simply dissolved into the night. The fear in the mess hall was raw, chewing holes in discipline. Thompson stood on a table, jabbing his finger at Captain Harlan. You're not in control anymore. Men are disappearing in their sleep, and you keep barking orders like this is a training drill. We need to leave. Now. Leave where? Harlan snapped. There's nothing for 100 miles in any direction but snow and death. We stay, we hold, and we wait for evac when the weather clears. His words sounded strong, but his eyes gave him away. He didn't believe them. None of us did. That afternoon, I checked the eastern corridor again. The storm outside screamed so loud the glass quivered, but what made my skin crawl wasn't outside, it was inside. On the frosted windows, finger trails dragged across the ice. Not words this time, just long, curving smears, like someone, or something, had pressed its face against the glass and breathed. I followed the trails down the corridor. They stopped at a locked storeroom door. My gut nodded. Slowly, I turned the key. The smell hit first, copper and rot. Inside lay Kinney, or what was left of him. His body was slumped against the shelves, his chest torn open as though something had reached inside and scooped him hollow. His eyes were gone. Only ragged sockets remained. Frozen tears streaked down his cheeks. I staggered back, bile in my throat. The door slammed behind me. I whirled, rifle raised. The lantern light flickered, shadows twitching along the walls. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw Ramirez again, his face half-formed in the dark, mouth opening too wide. Then it was gone. I kicked the door open and ran, heart hammering. When I reported what I'd seen, half the men believed me, half accused me of hysteria. Thompson just smirked. Funny how you're always the one who finds them, Miller. Maybe you're leading it here. The room went cold at his words. Some of the men nodded. That was when I realized the creature didn't need claws or teeth to tear us apart. It just had to whisper, and we'd finish the job ourselves. That night, nobody slept. We sat in shifts, rifles across our knees, lanterns glowing sickly red. Every creak of the walls, every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Around 3 a.m., I dozed despite myself. When I woke, the lantern was out, and beside me, in the dark, someone whispered my name. Miller. I turned, expecting Thompson or Harlan, but the cot was empty, and the voice came again, right at my ear, soft, familiar, and utterly wrong. When dawn came, the storm still screamed, and the base still bled fear. Nobody trusted the lights anymore. Nobody trusted the locks, and worst of all, nobody trusted each other. We sat in the mess hall, rifles close, eyes hollow. Thompson paced the room like a wolf in a cage, muttering about how the captain was dooming us. Every time the floor creaked, half the men jerked their rifles toward the sound. Ellis hadn't stopped whispering since the blackout. He rocked in his chair, murmuring about roots under the skin and mouths in the snow. The words crawled under our skin like insects. Captain Harlan slammed his hands on the table. Listen to me. We are soldiers. We hold the line. Panic is the enemy now. But his authority was paper thin. Thompson barked a laugh, sharp and cracked. Enemy? You think this is war? Look around, Captain. Your men are vanishing into locked rooms. Their voices walk the halls. Whatever's out there isn't an enemy, it's God, and it's already inside. The room fell silent. Some men nodded. Others gripped their rifles tighter. That was when Thompson pulled his weapon. Enough, he hissed. We're leaving. Tonight. Anyone who tries to stop me is already one of them. His rifle swept the room, trembling in his grip. The captain's hand hovered near his holster. Stand down, soldier. Thompson's eyes were wild, bloodshot, his mouth frothing with fear and fury. No. No more orders. No more waiting to be picked off like cattle. The tension snapped. Ellis lunged up screaming. Thompson whirled and the rifle thundered. The shot punched through Ellis's chest, sprang the wall with red. He collapsed, still whispering as blood bubbled from his lips. Chaos erupted. Men dove for cover, shouts filling the mess hall. I aimed, but froze. Shoot Thompson and risk killing a man who was only afraid? Or let him tear us apart from within? Harlan made the choice for me. His pistol barked once. Thompson's head snapped back and he crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. For a long, trembling moment, silence reigned. Ellis gurgled his last breath. Then only the storm remained, shrieking through the cracks in the walls. We buried both bodies in the snow outside. The storm swallowed the graves in minutes. Inside, men muttered about what Ellis had said as he bled out. Some swore he was still whispering after he died, his lips moving though no air left his lungs. That night, as I sat watch by the infirmary, I thought I heard him again. His voice, low and broken, carried through the vents. It's inside the skin. I pressed my ear to the grate, heart racing. The whisper grew clearer, crawling across the ducts like smoke. One of you. I staggered back, bile burning my throat. It wasn't enough for the thing to stalk us outside. It was inside now, wearing voices, wearing fears, maybe even wearing one of us. And the worst part? Deep down, I wasn't sure if it hadn't already found me. By the fourth night, the storm finally broke. The wind slowed to a moan, and a heavy silence settled over the base. For the first time in days, we could see past the fences. What we saw froze us worse than the cold. The snow wasn't untouched. It had been carved. From the observation tower, I looked out across the drifts and felt my stomach turn. The snow around the compound was marked with strange symbols, etched deep like wounds, circles within circles, spirals that bled into jagged runes, lines that seemed to shift if you looked too long. They stretched for yards in every direction, surrounding the base like a noose. Not natural, Keating whispered beside me. Snow doesn't move like that. Harlan ordered a team outside to investigate. I volunteered, though every bone in me screamed not to. Maybe it was duty, Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe the whispers were already pushing me. The cold was a blade against my skin as we stepped beyond the gates. Our boots crunched into the markings. Up close, the grooves were deeper, sharper, as though the snow had been melted away by heat, not carved by hand. Thompson's absence gnawed at me. Even dead, his paranoia lingered. "One of you," the whispers had said. We followed the spirals outward. Each step made my teeth ache, like the air itself vibrated wrong. The men shifted uneasily, rifles twitching at shadows. At the far edge of the markings, we found something worse, a shape half buried in the snow. We dug with gloved hands, breath ragged, until the form emerged. It was Dorn, or what was left of him. His body was frozen stiff, his face locked in a scream. His arms were twisted behind him at grotesque angles, joints bent backward. His chest was carved with the same spiral symbols that scarred the snow, burned deep into the flesh. The men recoiled, gagging. Keating dropped to his knees, retching into the ice. "What the hell is this?" someone choked out. Before anyone could answer, the wind rose again, carrying a sound I'll never forget. Laughter, thin and high, riding the air like a child's giggle, but warped, hollow, wrong. The men panicked, scrambling to haul Dorn's body back. Harlan barked orders, but fear made us deaf. I glanced back once and wished I hadn't. In the distance, beyond the markings, the snow shifted. Something tall moved just beneath the surface, rippling like a shark beneath water. We ran. Back inside, doors barred, the body laid in the infirmary. Keating tried to examine it, but the cuts in Dorn's flesh seemed to writhe under the light, shifting shapes when we looked away. The whispers grew stronger that night, clearer. They didn't just murmur anymore, they sang. Low, droning voices seeping through the vents, the walls, even the floors. The song vibrated in my teeth, in my bones. Words I couldn't understand, but meaning I felt all the same. An invitation, a promise. Outside, the symbols glowed faintly in the moonlight, as if the snow itself remembered fire. And I knew with cold certainty that the markings weren't meant to keep the thing out. They were meant to call it in. We barely slept after finding Dorn. Every time someone closed their eyes, the whispers grew louder. Some swore they could see the markings burned into the inside of their eyelids. By morning, the storm had eased enough to give us a clear view beyond the fence. That was when we realized something was wrong. The markings had moved. Not erased, shifted. The spirals we'd walked through yesterday now coiled closer to the base, tightening like the rings of a trap. Where we had stood, there were fresh symbols carved into the snow, flawless and sharp, as though the storm hadn't touched them. "They're expanding inward," Keating said, voice barely audible. "Every night, they get closer." Captain Harlan gripped the railing so hard his knuckles whitened. "We hold the line. No one steps outside without my order. No more patrols. Whatever it is, it wants us scattered." But even as he said it, we all knew, if the circles kept shrinking, there'd be nowhere left to stand. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Men avoided the windows as if looking at the markings might draw them in. The mess hall stank of sweat and fear. Every creak of the walls sounded like footsteps. That night I drew watch on the west wing. The moon shone bright on the snow, lighting the spirals beyond the fence. They pulsed faintly, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I couldn't look away. That was when I saw him. Hayes. He stood at the far edge of the markings, boots buried in the snow. His uniform was torn, his face pale. His eyes, God, his eyes were gone, just hollow pits, yet I knew it was him. "Miller," he called, voice carried perfectly by the still air. "It's safe here. Come see." My hand gripped the rifle so tight my knuckles cracked. "You're dead," I whispered. "Not dead," Hayes said. His mouth moved wrong, stretching too wide. "Changed. Better. You don't have to be afraid anymore." I backed from the window, pulse hammering. My radio hissed with static, then his voice bled through it, soft and coaxing. "Come see, come see, come see." I nearly fired through the glass. Instead, I ripped the radio from my belt and smashed it against the wall until it shattered. When I looked back, Hayes was gone. Only the glowing spirals remained, closer now, so close I swore they pressed against the fence posts. At dawn, we confirmed it. The outermost markings had reached the gates. Keating muttered about rituals, about summoning. Thompson's old words echoed in my mind. It is the storm. But this wasn't the storm. It was something worse, something using the storm as its cloak. Harlan called a meeting. His voice shook as he spoke, though he tried to hide it. We don't wait anymore. When the weather clears enough, we move for extraction. Until then, we hold. Together. But the word together felt like a lie. Because I kept hearing Hayes's voice in the back of my skull, whispering soft as snow, "You're already one of us, already one of..." The night the fence was breached, I stopped pretending there was any safety left. The day had been quiet, too quiet. No whispers in the halls, no laughter on the wind, just silence heavy enough to crush the breath from our chests. Some of the men even dared to hope the thing had retreated, but hope was just another trap. My watch began at midnight. The snow was still, the sky clear for the first time in weeks. The moon painted the base silver, every shadow long and sharp. That was when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just the storm playing tricks on the eyes, a ripple in the snow beyond the wire. But then the fence groaned, the steel posts shuddered, and frost cracked off them like flaking skin. Something pressed against the barrier. Not a man, not an animal. Something tall, shifting, its shape writhing as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The lights along the perimeter flickered, one by one, as though the thing's presence drained them dry. I radioed it in, voice trembling. Movement on the west perimeter. Breach imminent. The captain and 3 others rushed to my post. By then the fence was bowing inward. The steel links stretched, then snapped with a sound like gunfire. The thing slid through. It didn't climb, didn't tear. It just passed. Like smoke, but solid enough to bend the metal behind it. The men opened fire. The muzzle flashes lit the night in bursts. I saw glimpses of it then. Limbs too long, a head that split down the middle, eyes that weren't eyes at all, but pale, glowing pits. The rounds hit, but the thing didn't fall. It only staggered, pieces of it breaking off and scattering like ash before reforming. Then it screamed. Not loud, not human. A sound so low it rattled my bones, made my teeth ache. The snow around it rippled outward in a perfect circle, erasing the fresh markings that had crept to the fence line. Harlan ordered us to fall back. We slammed the inner gates shut, sealing the base within its last defense. But the creature didn't follow. It just stood there, head cocked, as though studying us. Then it spoke. Not in words we knew, something guttural, grinding, but threaded with echoes of voices we did know. Ramirez, Hayes, even Ellis's dying whispers. "Open," it said. "Come out. Join." The captain barked for us to hold the line, but the damage was done. One of the privates dropped his rifle and bolted, scrambling toward the voice. Before anyone could stop him, he flung himself against the gate. The creature caught him, its arms folded around him, pulling him close. His screams rose, then cut off as his body melted into its form, swallowed like water into dry soil. For a moment, his face rippled across its surface, mouth open, eyes pleading, before vanishing. We dragged the gate shut again, hearts hammering, but the creature didn't advance further. It just melted back into the snow, sinking without a trace. The silence returned, but the fence was broken now. And we all knew it would be back. After the breach, the base was never the same. Every creak of the walls sounded like that low, bone-rattling scream. Every shadow stretched too long, as if it might uncoil and reach for us. The men didn't talk about sleep anymore. Sleep was just another way of surrendering. At dawn, Harlan called a meeting in the mess hall. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. They looked sunken, haunted. "We can't wait any longer," he said. "If extraction's not coming, we have to make them see us. We send a signal." The men stirred, restless. Keating frowned. "With what?" "Radios are dead. Lines are cut." "A fire," Harlan said. "Big enough to be seen from the air. We build it in the courtyard, burn fuel, supplies, anything that'll burn. If the storm's thinning, Maybe someone out there will notice. The suggestion split the room. Some nodded eagerly, desperate for action. Others shook their heads. Thompson might have been dead, but his paranoia lived on in the voices of the survivors. "Light a fire that big, and we'll be showing it exactly where we are," one man muttered. "Might as well open the gates and invite it in." Arguments flared. I watched the fear boil over into shouting, the tension sparking like static in the air. Finally, I stood. We're already trapped. If help doesn't come, we die here. If that thing wants us, it already knows where to find us. At least a fire gives us a chance. The room fell into uneasy silence. By nightfall, we were dragging barrels of fuel into the courtyard. The snow squeaked beneath our boots, the markings faintly glowing just beyond the walls. My skin prickled every time I looked at them. The fire roared to life with a blast of heat, the flames climbing high, licking the night sky. Sparks spiraled upward, lost against the dark. For a brief moment, standing in that circle of light, I almost believed we'd done something right. Warmth drove back the cold, the shadows retreated, and men's faces looked almost human again. Then the whispers began. Not faint this time. Louder, clearer. They rose from the snow, from the air, from the flames themselves. "Come out. Join us. Burn." The men clutched their rifles, eyes darting. The fire popped and crackled, spitting embers into the wind. And in the distance, beyond the markings, I saw shapes, dozens of them. Figures, half-formed, standing in the snow. Faces I knew. Ramirez, Ellis, Dorn, even Thompson, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching the fire. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering that same song. Keating shouted and fired into the night. Bullets tore into the snow, but the figures didn't flinch. They only flickered, like candle flames. Then the wind shifted. The fire bent low, sucked sideways as though something enormous was drawing in breath. The flames roared, climbing higher, twisting into spirals that mimicked the ones in the snow. The men broke. Some ran for cover, others dropped their weapons and prayed. I just stood there, frozen, as the flames shaped themselves into a vast, grinning face that stared down at us from the night sky. And then, just as suddenly, the fire collapsed. Darkness rushed back in, and outside the walls the whispers laughed. After the fire, none of us spoke of rescue again. The signal hadn't brought help, it had only brought them closer. By dawn, the markings had advanced once more. Now they wrapped the outer walls of the compound, spirals curling around the buildings like a tightening fist. The base wasn't surrounded, it was being claimed. That was when Captain Harlan told us about the bunker. Most of us hadn't known it existed. The schematics had been buried in classified files. Harlan admitted he'd been keeping it secret as a last resort, a Cold War relic buried deep under the base. Reinforced doors, independent power, enough rations for weeks. "If we can make it inside," he said, "we hold out until rescue comes, or until this thing passes us by." Keating scoffed. "You think steel and concrete will stop it? It bent the fence like paper. It walked through bullets." "It's all we have," Harlan snapped, "and it's better than waiting up here to be picked off." Arguments sparked again, but this time no one had the strength to fight long. We all knew the surface was lost. The bunker was a gamble, but so was breathing. That night we began preparations. The hatch was hidden beneath the storage wing, sealed with a wheel-lock door. It took 4 men straining to turn it, the metal screaming as rust gave way. The air that spilled out was stale, coppery, as if the bunker had been holding its breath for decades. We carried crates of rations, ammo, medical kits into the stairwell. Every trip felt like moving deeper into a grave. The air grew colder as we descended, the walls sweating with condensation. My flashlight beam jittered across faded hazard signs. Bio-containment. Authorized personnel only. The bunker wasn't just a shelter, it had been built for something else. Something darker. On the second trip down, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, rifle raised. No one was there, just the echo of boots that weren't mine, fading into the dark below. By midnight, we'd moved most of our supplies. The men gathered in the stairwell, reluctant to descend fully. The bunker yawned open beneath us, swallowing our light. That was when the whispers returned. Not from outside this time. From below. Down here. Safe. Join us. The voices of our dead curling up the stairwell like smoke. Keating refused to go further. He dropped his crate, eyes wild. It's already inside. You want to walk right into its mouth? Harlan raised his pistol. We go down. That's an order. Keating shook his head, backing away. Then he bolted. We heard his footsteps pound across the compound, fading into the night. A single scream followed, short, cut off. Then silence. The men looked to Harlan. His face was stone, but his hand trembled on the pistol. We finish what we started, he said. At dawn, we move below. I didn't argue, but as I stared down into that gaping stairwell, the whispers coiling thicker, I wondered if we were abandoning one trap only to walk willingly into another. And God help me, part of me wanted to follow. At dawn, we descended. The stairwell groaned with every step, our boots clanging on rusted steel. The deeper we went, the colder the air became. It smelled of mildew, iron, and something faintly sweet, like rot masked by chemicals. At the bottom, the corridor stretched before us. Flickering emergency lights hummed weakly, powered by an old generator that shouldn't have still been alive. The walls dripped with condensation, paint peeling in long curls. Signs stenciled in block letters lined the hallway. Research Wing A, Biolock, no unauthorized entry. This isn't a shelter, Keating would have said if he were still alive, and he'd have been right. We moved in tight formation, rifles up, flashlights jittering. The whispers followed us down, seeping through the walls like moisture. The first door we forced open led to a laboratory. The air inside was heavy, stale. Dust-coated long-dead terminals, broken glass vials scattered across the counters. Old restraints bolted into tables told us more than we wanted to know. Containment, Ellis would have whispered. I ran my hand over a clipboard left behind. The paper was yellowed, the ink smeared, but I made out a few words. Subject unresponsive. Resists classification. Organic resonance observed. I shoved it back down. Further in, we found a cell block. Small rooms with thick glass fronts, reinforced doors, the kind you'd expect in a maximum security prison. The walls inside were scarred with deep gouges like claws or hands that had raked endlessly at the steel. One cell's glass was shattered. The inside was blackened, as though fire had consumed it. And on the back wall, burned deep into the metal, was the same spiral symbol we'd seen in the snow. It started here, I said before I could stop myself. Whatever's out there, it was locked down in here first. The men shifted uneasily, rifles twitching toward shadow. Nobody argued. Harlan ordered us deeper. The corridor ended at a blast door, twice the thickness of the ones above. Warning signs covered its surface. Absolute containment. Do not breach. It had already been forced open. The steel was bent outward, as if something had pushed from the inside. We hesitated, staring into the dark beyond. The air that spilled out was colder, damper, thick with that sweet cloying smell. Then the generator cut out. Darkness swallowed us whole. In that silence, the whispers surged, no longer distant but immediate, inside our heads, in our ears, beneath our skin. You brought us back. You opened the door. We were waiting. Men screamed, firing blindly into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor in strobing bursts, illuminating shapes that shouldn't have fit in the hallway, shapes twisting against the ceiling, sliding across the floor. Something slammed into me, knocking me down. I felt hands, not human, too many fingers, clutching at my throat. I fired point blank until the weight lifted, until the smell of ash filled my nose. When the generator sputtered back to life, 3 men were gone. Just gone. Their rifles lay on the floor, still warm. Harlan's face was ashen. He finally said what none of us wanted to admit. "We didn't find a shelter," he whispered. His eyes flicked to the blast door yawning open behind us. "We found its cradle. We didn't sleep again. Not after what we saw behind that blast door." The corridor beyond was alive. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. The paint blistered and pulsing faintly, as if veins ran beneath the concrete. The air carried a low hum, almost electrical, but it wasn't power, it was singing. We advanced only because standing still felt worse. The whispers didn't coax anymore. They commanded. Belong. Return. Become. The men's nerves were threadbare. One stumbled, another fired at nothing, the gunshot ricocheting until our ears rang. Each step deeper stripped something away. Courage, reason, the idea that we were still soldiers at all. Finally, the corridor opened into a chamber, the heart of the bunker. It wasn't a room, not anymore. The concrete had been scoured away, replaced with spirals burned deep into the floor and walls, black as char. In the center yawned a pit, a perfect circle that descended into nothingness. We'd found the source. The whispers surged, deafening, as though the pit exhaled them. Faces swam in the dark, the dead we'd lost. Hayes, Ellis, Ramirez, all mouthing the same words. Join us. One of the privates dropped his rifle and walked forward, eyes glassy. Harlan shouted, but it was useless. The man stepped into the pit without hesitation, and the shadows swallowed him whole. Keating's clipboard notes came back to me. Resist classification, organic resonance. They hadn't built the bunker to protect people. They'd built it to study this thing, and when they couldn't control it, they buried it. But something had let it loose. Maybe the storm, maybe time, maybe us. Harlan tried to rally us, voice hoarse. We seal this room. We bury it again. That's the mission. But the mission was already lost. The floor trembled. The spirals glowed, red this time, pulsing with each heartbeat. The whispers became a single word, shout, and by 1,000 mouths, now. The pit erupted. Darkness poured out, not smoke, not shadow. Something thicker, alive. It surged up the walls, through the ceiling, tearing concrete like paper. Men screamed as it wrapped around them, their bodies dissolving into the mass. Their faces appeared a moment later in the black, mouths open in silent laughter. I ran. I don't remember choosing to. I just ran. Through the corridor, up the stairwell, tripping, scrambling, while the voices clawed at the edges of my mind. When I burst into the surface air, dawn was breaking. The base was silent. Snow drifted in lazy spirals, glowing faintly with the same red light. Behind me, the bunker groaned. Then the ground caved, swallowing the storage wing in a roar of collapsing steel. The whispers rose once more, then quieted, as though the earth itself had drawn a deep breath and held it. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at the ruin. Hours, maybe. Until the snow began covering the last traces, smoothing everything into silence. Now, years later, I still hear it. Sometimes in the wind, sometimes in the dark before sleep, sometimes in my own voice when I'm not careful. Because I think it marked me that night. And I know that pit is still down there, waiting. And one night soon, when the storm returns, it will open again.